Hello, hello, hello. Hello, my Facebook family. Welcome to Hope More. I am so excited to be with you today because I miss my show and I'm really glad to be back this June. So I need you to come below and support this show. We're going to be talking about male victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And why is it so easy? Well, it seems easier to ignore the plight of those victims, those male victims. Is it because as men? Let's talk about it. So I need you to come along. Please, if you are already a Hope More family member and you get the little announcement when we come on, I thank you for watching and placing it on your page. Thank you for sharing it. And if you're on YouTube, you will hit the little bell and it'll tell you when I come on. And I really appreciate your support and effort. I appreciate everything that you all have been doing and encouraging people to watch. So share the love, share the love. If you have any doubts of where you are, just know that on Facebook or YouTube, you can go to lowercase HOPE, uppercase MORE. It's purposeful, one word, because you only need a little hope to want and expect more. On this show, we deal with issues of justice, family, and the light. I'm an unabashed Christian who has countercultural norms when it comes to discussing the world and politics, but I know I am not righteous in and of myself, and I could be wrong as I'll get out, but what I love is discussion because ignorance is actually one of the worst violence in this country and the world. When people don't know, they don't even understand what the fight is about. So please share the love, share, share, share. So today's discussion, oh, sorry, let me share the mic. Yes. Today's discussion, we're going to continue with our discussion on America's appetite for violence. With the mass shootings, the high profile cases of domestic violence, the unfortunate situation of suicides, and even abortion continues to note to me that we experience and have some type of thirst or hunger for violence, either to spectate on the aftermaths or to participate in things dealing with violence, or just the idea and discussion of what is taking a life, what is murder, what is right, what is wrong. And it's like, what feeds this appetite has been one of the things that draw me to this conversation. And in light of some situations that have happened and been taking showcase, if you will, of the media, that I thought would be an interesting way of coming about this is to even talk about why is it when a man says he is a victim of violence, particularly intimate partner violence, domestic violence, is it so much easier to ignore their victimhood? Or what about if a man says he's been sexually assaulted? We don't seem to come up in arms as much as when a woman says it. In fact, it feels like the man not only has to prove that he's a victim, but he has to go overboard because the presumption and default of victimization when it comes to domestic violence and sexual assault, let's admit it, is a woman. A woman plays those parts in the role. And even if they don't play that specific part and role, we always or often understand that they are the ones who are needing the more, they're the ones who often are elevated to be worthy of belief. Worthy of belief. So we're going to talk about that. And in talking about that, I want you guys to join the conversation. Comment below as to what you think are the reasons that we often ignore women who may be perpetrators against male victims, or should we say it the other way around? We ignore the plight, or easier to just ignore the fact that we have men who are victims. And I want you to join the conversation and comment below, because actually majority of my viewers watch on replay. So I want to go back and look at your comments and maybe know how you're being impacted by the conversation. If you know someone or have yourself been a victim as a male in domestic violence or sexual assault, and you feel comfortable in sharing, please let us know. Put MenToo if that's been something you've experienced. You don't have to if it's triggering, understand that you may not even want to watch this show, but I'm hoping that it would help us have an honest discussion about something that we too often only attribute to females. So join the conversation. And the question here that we're going to be dealing with is basically, why is it easier to ignore men? And I wanted to start off in noting some really highlighted situations. We have recently the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case, where it was a defamation case, and a lot of people forget that. This was not a criminal trial. This wasn't even a domestic violence hearing. This was defamation, meaning that Mr. Depp's personality, character was defamed, and it impacted him in a negative way with his career. So we didn't have all the other type of proof burdens that we often think of when we think about like criminal cases. However, what came out in this trial was that whatever else happened, that actually Johnny Depp was also or was a victim of domestic violence in this relationship. Here he is, much older. He has, admitted drug problems, and we have his wife, her ex-wife, who's much younger, blonde, blue eyes, just, in America and particularly can play that victim card and be set up on in a castle so high and just like so worthy of protection, or at least in our Western culture, often just considered, the virtue of society that must be protected. But what came out was that this man was getting punched, he was getting hit, the woman sliced the tip of his finger off. Regardless of whatever else happened in this relationship, it was very, very, very obvious that he also, or he was the only person that was receiving blows. And even the fact that Amber Heard said on recording that, okay, Johnny, go out there and tell the world that you're a domestic violence, victim. Who's going to believe you? Other cases where we see men have been installed as, or it noted that these men are victims of violence, also came with the Terry Crews situation. Many of you may remember that Terry Crews was exploding the Me Too movement by noting that he also, in a professional sense, was sexually assaulted, sexually harassed by a person who's been a producer and an executive producer of that. So someone funding different shows came up and grabbed his crotch. Now, when we think about the Me Too movement, it was started by women and for other women in particular to note sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment in the workplace. But here we are. Here's a man who's also been sexually assaulted in this particular situation by another man, but it happens. But I know a lot of people looked at him with side eye like, really? Really? So he also was a black man who is a black man who's very, very built. And you're like, if anybody came touching you, you could defend yourself. So he also was getting the side eye or ignored, maybe for other reasons besides what he was sharing. But again, it was an example of men being victims and really there being a very slow beat or non-existent beat to protect or defend or to validate them. Now, why is that? And we're going to talk a little bit about why it is, but I need you to comment below. What do you think are some of the reasons why this is the case? I want to make you aware of another situation that really drew my attention and it made me want to have this conversation. I was checking out all these news stories about Norfolk State football team, that there have been a number of people who've said that they were sexually assaulted, attempted at rape, or maybe according to whatever the laws are in Virginia, have been raped by other football players and supposedly as an act of hazing. And the coaches knew that some of these players are being held down and groped by their genitals and all these kind of things. And like, well, they do it to each other. It's a part of the culture. But a number of these young men, I mean, they're not just upset, but now it's being reported and there's lawsuits happening. And that was men against men. And I didn't realize until this particular story that was coming out with Norfolk State that a lot of times the sexual, or not a lot of times, some of the instances of sexual assault by men have been like say in the military or football or things that are known to be very masculine. They're often under the guise of this is hazing. We're going to hold him down and put our fingers up his butt. What? We're going to hold him down and play with his genitals. We're going to hold him down or make him do something that is a sexual violent act. And I think people, parents, the society needs to start paying attention. Here are some statistics that may surprise you. 1 out of every 4 men in America will have experienced some type of sexual assault in their lifetime. 1 out of every 4 men. That is just crazy. Now, when it comes to domestic violence, something that a lot of people don't know is that about 40% or more of all domestic violence cases actually have male victims. Now, this includes intimate partner violence and also children, as well as maybe elderly men who are being abused by caretakers. But here's the truth. There are a number of men in intimate heterosexual partnerships that are routinely being abused. And you know what? If it happens one time too many. And we often as a nation ignore it, or we play it down, or we just don't even describe it as domestic violence. Now, you'll see a lot of similarities in the fact that often all these types of victims, male or female, are not one, they're not easy or feeling open to go tell somebody because they don't consider it violence, or it's violence but it's so normative in their family they discount it as violence, or 3, they're embarrassed. So if that is the case for a number of women, could you imagine what the head of the house, the man, may feel if he's in a situation where he is being continuously victimized by his spouse? Now, say in the hereditary norm relationship, often people would assume if there's a call for domestic violence that it's the man hurting the woman. But we know, and some of you may have experienced yourself, or you had a family member to experience, that they will come, the police often will try to attest who is the person who is most responsible, and they often will grab the man or ask the man to leave the house, especially if there's children and there's not arrest necessarily. But if they arrest, they often will arrest the man. And if there's any type of scratches or bruises on the female, that often was like, yes, you are going to jail. But things are starting to swing a little bit. Police officers are becoming more, I don't know, more savvy, or just sometimes, there is a situation where maybe the female of the couple is being more irate, that they will, or more crying or upset, and they'll take the male to jail. So it's not often easy to tell at arrest what is happening. However, this is what we do know. We know that men also have situations where women are having power over them, whether it's hitting them. Today I heard a story about a man in Australia. He was always concerned, and he put it on himself, like, I'm not making my wife happy, so he felt he deserved it. But he described her taking a sharp pencil and just stabbing him in the back of his arm because she didn't like how he mowed the lawn. We see these shows where the woman slaps the man, and it's supposed to be sort of like sexy. Not that it also can't be somebody's foreplay, someone gets choked, someone likes that kind of stuff, but where it was done degradingly and the partner wasn't down for it. It's not cute to put your hands on anybody. I don't care if they're your husband or your wife. That is not cute. That is not cute outside of some type of sexual pleasure that you guys get a bang off. But that is not cute. And I tell you, like I tell my female friends, if a man finds it very easy to put their hands on you, whether to restrain you from leaving or to stop you from going somewhere, you need to think about not being in that relationship. That could be a sign that physical abuse is on its way. And sometimes that grabbing is also physical abuse. I just know there is measures, right? But I'm like, please don't leave, and I close the door. That's not necessarily domestic violence, but it's like, please don't leave, and I grab you by your neck and I pull you back. And I'm a woman. I am still doing violence to you as a man. And if you were if my brother was in that situation, or some friend that's a guy that's mine, I'm like, you need to leave her alone because she's getting too physical to put their hands on you. But this is why the subject of male victims, and that there is a growing MenToo movement, is because men are often suffering from the trauma of intimate partner violence, but they often don't feel that they could come out, or when they come out, the consequences seem way more negative. Excuse me. So let's talk about why it is that we are easily ignoring these men. One, and it's already been stated, often men do not think of violent or violative behavior towards them as violence, especially when it comes from a woman. Now I do, and I am in the old school genre of, if a woman hits you, if a woman hits a man, that the man still should not put his hands responsibly on the woman, especially someone who's your wife. It just, I'm like, you need to have constraint. Do you have to stay in that situation? No. Can you separate? Could you call the police even? Yes. But often men would consider slapping, hitting. I've even had some crazy stories where somebody was stabbed in the chest, and they're like, well, I must have pissed her off. If that man was in the position of the woman, they may not be so easily dismissive that the behavior that their husband or their boyfriend showed them or acted toward them, they may not be so quick to say, oh, that's not violent. But men often don't think about that behavior as violence because we raise boys in a different way, shake it off, toughen up. Maybe you did something wrong. And that is unhealthy. And we need to break that with our boys. Like, no one should put their hands on anyone. And a female should not put her hands on you just because she's mad. That needs to be corrected. But I do think, and maybe it's the chivalry in me, or just the fact that if anything come of it, it's probably going to be by default believing the woman's word, is that you want your boys to grow up as men and have control over their behavior. So number one, men often don't think about the behavior as violent. Number two, men often believe that an admittance of being harmed, particularly about from their wife or girlfriend, it makes them look weak. It makes them look weak. It's sort of both sides of the same coin. They believe that, you know, doing something like Johnny Depp did, getting on the stand and recounting these painful moments where, his cute little, somewhat petite wife at the time would make him look like, wait a minute, you're a global superstar. Most of the marriage, he was a little bigger than her. Come on now, like, she hurt you. We don't often have that same sympathy because it makes them look weak. Number three would be that often men don't receive sympathy when they share that they have been hurt. The sympathy may come from close family members, especially, if you're like me, if somebody hurt my brother, yeah, I'm not going to be sympathetic. But because of that lack of sympathy, not only does it make it look weak, but also it diminishes the violence that's done against them. Another reason, number four, if you're counting, that especially domestic violence, and I also included sexual assault, and a lot of this is in the same vein, but in particular, intimate violence type of situations, there are not as many services that could provide a way of escape to the man. Most shelters in the state of Florida, and I would believe almost every state, are fashioned toward females and females with children, minor children. I don't know of any center in my local Big Bend area who will take a man who is a domestic violence survivor. So you have a man presumably in a house with his significant other and children. And if she ran, she may have a shelter to go live in and receive services where a man does not. And that lack of support can be very disconcerting because it's often in those areas where the advocates know, like, how there's a support group over here and you can get relocation housing. However, listen up, men. If you know of anyone or you yourself are a victim, the same 1-800 hotlines that would assist in getting domestic violence information can also assist you with residential relocation needs, can also assign you a counselor. So there's still services, even if a shelter service is not available. So another reason why men often don't seek or share or maybe ignore their victimization, or they feel they are, because they're not as demonstrable. There are things that are not as demonstrable resources for them, like refuge or shelter houses for abused victims. But there's still services. Now, another reason why you see violence often ignored when it comes to males, especially when it comes to sexual assault, depending on who the person is. It's always depending on who the person is. But I'm just going to speak in sort of like binary terms of a man being sexually assaulted by another woman or another man. But I think when it comes to sexual assault, also, if it's by a woman, like a teacher having sex with students underage, and that's unprofessional as well as criminal. Often males think of different sexual assault situations that can happen like that as like a badge of honor. It's a way of growing into manhood, being sexualized at a young age by women who are babysitting them, aunties, teachers, and they feel that it's something to not be ashamed about. And if they feel ashamed, then they're like, well, what's wrong with you? Well, we know that there are predatory women who take advantage of our boys, and they grow up often with some type of hidden shame, as well as it may manifest itself in other type of behaviors that are not um, helpful or healthy for them. And we have to break that stigma. Like, no, that's not, that 21-year-old or 25-year-old teacher having sex with an eighth grader, that is sexual violence. And we need to teach that to our children. Like, this is violent. This is good touch and this is bad touch. And no one, even if it's a um, woman is allowed to do that to you, and you need to come tell me. Now, we know another reason why sexual assault, especially where they're being victimized by other boys or men, is often not shared because they believe that their sexual identity or their sexual attraction will be questioned. And this is just so unfortunate, but it's so true. I've even done it and not realized I'd done it. Or I've heard other opportunities and someone's saying something and they're like, oh, well, not that so much someone liked it, but just the idea of like, and I'm giving a really, 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 really bad metaphoric example because I'm not giving you anything, but I'm trying to think where there's a young boy who may be effeminate at a very young age, and someone would assume that someone's been messing with them, but almost makes a joke of it versus like, if this child is under, is a child, they should not be being sexualized by an older child or adult. That is violence. That is violence. So whether it's someone of the same sex or someone of opposite sex, there's often shame attached. And if it's the same sex, then there's often fear that the person will be considered gay or that it will be used as an excuse as to why they may be same-sex attracted. So that's another reason why we often ignore that type of victimization. And I was thinking about the idea that another reason why we ignore often men who are victimized, just in general, it could be the thought of, you know what, they're men and they should get over it. And, or it's sort of like, well, it's normally the men messing with us. So we only have a little bit of space and focus on victims, and it just needs by default go to women, since women are numerically as well as percentage wise more likely to be a victim of violence in domestic violence and sexual assault. And that is not worthy as well. We see the numbers are not that far apart. 1 out of 4 domestic violence person, I mean, 1 out of every 4 sexual assault victim is a man, and 40% of domestic violence are men. So we can't just keep making domestic violence and sexual assault a gender only type of issue. Now I know there was a popular magazine during the Amber Heard trial that wrote this op-ed piece, I think, that was saying like, hey, we need to believe Amber Heard. We need to believe all women. I think what they were trying to do is create female solidarity in cases where people should feel more open to come up and tell what's happening. But it really is, to me, a misfire, because we should give ear to every person who says they're a victim. But you got to look at the facts. You got to look at the evidence. You got to. It should not be so gender focused that we just assume that every man who says that they're victims, that they're lying. I think the Amber Heard case is a great example of that. We should hold fast to the truth. And this case, Amber Heard was obviously locked and not taking accountability for what she already was caught as to having committed, hurting him. Oh, I'm slapping you, not punching you. But she would not be accountable for anything. So I'm glad she lost. She should have lost. But we do not just believe all women because they're women. Like, I wouldn't say believe all Black people because they're Black in a case of police brutality. But I would say give ear, take notice, and hold space open that this person is really hurt until you know otherwise. But once you know otherwise, I'm not down for this, like, oh, just believe women because they're women. Because I think true equality, sexual equality, is that, you know what? If you can dish it, if we say that we can do this, we should earn the same amount of money, we should have the same amount of rights, and that we're powerful, we should also take responsibility in cases where women have used that power in their homes or in a workplace and use it against a man. Like, welcome to 21st century. We have that power is not just wielded against those who we by default think are at fault. It needs to go with the truth. But I do say hold open space when people make complaints, especially because we are far from there being a total equal system. But that doesn't mean that men can't be victims as well. Now, I have had a number of circumstances as a lawyer where I have represented men requesting restraining orders because of physical violence in their intimate relationship. I have seen, unfortunately, husbands who are embarrassed, but their spouse, often dealing with mental health as well as drugs, that's often a denominator I've seen, where they are being violated often, or it doesn't even have to be often be domestic violence, but in a disturbing way that causes him, sometimes their children, to feel unsafe. And it's so hard. Those cases could be even harder because, again, by default, it's like, wait a minute, what? Are you handicapped? Why can't you just push your offer? Is that all? Domestic violence and sexual harassment is not just about pain, right? It's not, well, you can't take that. Why should any victim be held less worthy of intervention because they supposedly can't take it. Oh, she just slapped you. You're a 6'2" man. You can just take it. That's not how we determine victims. Some people like, I've been beat up on my life. I could take a few licks. That is not how we define it. You have a right to bodily autonomy for safety, and you should not have to take any type of violence. And I believe as we grow as a more progressive society, we will start holding more room open to men who have been victims, who want and need intervention and support, and that they should have justice delivered to them. Justice delivered to them. And that is my hope, that the whole idea of violence in America or across the world that would ignore that men also face those types of victimized circumstances, that we not ignore that they have needs too, and we need to stop ignoring them. Now, I do think men often are more open to different interventions that maybe women typically don't go for. Just like a lot of women, because we're verbal, being in a support group that talks all the time, often something that we would enjoy and look forward to. Men often are more physical. Maybe it's about joining a group that does sports or camping or something where they bond and have a unique experience with a counselor, but it's not just talking to each other. So we're coming from a long way of even understanding the needs of more men when it comes to being victims of abuse. But let me tell you, that trauma is real. The trauma is real, and we have generations of men who have so much trauma because they were abused and maybe being abused right now, and they don't feel like anyone would take them seriously or give them help. And I just want you to know, help is out there. Help is out there. Every area has, and that doesn't mean your city, so it could be multiple counties, has a certified domestic violence center. A certified domestic violence center, and some have additional certified sexual violence centers. So I can't give you a number for each and every one, but it's a certified domestic violence center and certified sexual violence center, and they will assist men in they will assist men, women, trans people, whoever needs help in getting out and safety planning a situation that where they've been that's volatile and unsafe. They will help you plan a way of getting out, and it's up to each person what they want to do. So sometimes they'll have safety planning if for whatever reason that person is going to stay in that situation, but they're trying to be more guarded, because every victim has a different story. But I want to say that as we look at an appetite for violence or what we have before us, that we give a little bit of thought as to whether we have ignored men who may be in need of intervention as well. So join the conversation. Definitely. Thank you so much for everybody who's come on. I'm just going at it so hard in my mind and heart. But thank you so much for those who've come on, because I do think this is a big issue. But I think also that the Amber Heard situation and Terry Crews situation, and just the idea that men also get it, is that we have to hold space for that, because that could be our son, that could be our brother, our cousin. I know that when it comes to partner violence, majority of women who die by homicide die at the hands of their intimate partner, husband, boyfriend. But there are some studies that say 25% of men die from the hands of their wives or girlfriends as well. And I have some close friends, a lawyer friend, an entertainer friend, their brother, their son were killed by women that they were dating, were killed by women that were dating. And there had been signs of domestic violence prior to that they never, I won't say they never dealt with, but that went sort of under the rug until the murder happened, and then the families are holding the pieces. We have a person here in my hometown, their son that lived outside of town, he was murdered by his girlfriend. Let's protect our sons and our brothers and our cousins, and let's get them the help they need and be on the watch. And feel free to say, you know what, you don't have to take that. That's domestic violence. That's intimate partner violence. That's sexual assault, sexual harassment. And don't key it away or say, like, oh, you big enough, you can take it. You don't have to take anything. You don't have to take anything at all. So thank you for joining me here on Hope More. I hope I've given you something to think about and maybe things to watch out for, even when you have teenagers who are so hanging out, hooking up. Just see how they act. Do you see the girl grabbing onto him, hitting? Like, we need our young girls also to know that that's not okay. And sometimes it is glamorized in television movies, and maybe they don't know. That's just, ooh, that's how I am. I'm spicy. You put your hand on my nephew or my cousins, I'm like, oh, we'll call the police now. Restraining order, restraining order. But I know this is a very serious situation, and sometimes in those serious times, we need moments that we've thought about prior to what's happening to help make a good decision or to help a friend make a good decision. This is Hope with Hope More. I want you to know that I love you and I mean it. And I look forward to talking to you next week on our third installment of America's Appetite for Violence. We're probably going to be talking about suicide, but that will be here, and just look out for the advertisements. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing. And I love you. And I look forward to talking to you later. Bye-bye.